So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
What did you do when your spouse didn't want to get married in the Catholic Church? Why did you get married in the Catholic Church? Perhaps you didn't, and then years later you decided you really wanted to have your marriage blessed. Why? I'd love to hear from you today during our marriage hour. Give us a call. The number's 1-888-914-9149, or you can head over to my Instagram to ask your question. We would love to hear from you today to share your insights with other people to help them see why marriage in the church matters. We'll discuss that later on. We're going to discuss laziness in marriage, the God-given roles in marriage, how there are gender differences, and how we conduct our lives both materially and spiritually in marriage. Father Dave Heney will be joining me to discuss just this, especially how men and husbands can step into their role and become a spiritual leader within the home or even as they're going through that dating process. So invite a friend, lean in, join us. You can let people know that you're listening live on the Relevant Radio app or wherever you love to listen to. Also coming up is the question, what did you do as a Catholic when your spouse didn't want to have children? Love to hear from you on this and why I get married in the Catholic Church. Again, the number's 1-888-914-9149. I want to talk first here about laziness in marriage because it so often occurs. I've only been married a couple of years, but it's easy. I remember talking to my sister, and we were married within 2 weeks of each other. And by the way, I had a baby within a week of each other as well. Get that. And I remember one of the things we were talking about was something as simple as the dishwasher and how you could sit there and just wait for your spouse to unload the dishwasher. And the time could go on and the time could go on to no avail until finally you very begrudgingly and maybe with a little bit of resentment, you unload the dishwasher yourself. It's the simplest thing, but it points to how laziness in marriage is so easy. And when we get used to this in really simple ways, it builds and builds and builds into other big reasons why we don't do this, we don't do that. Well, you didn't do it. We become this comparison culture with our spouse. And so as we celebrate the feast day of a great saint, St. Cyril of Jerusalem, a bishop, someone who was one of the early church fathers, I think about some of what he said when it comes to the soul. We have a number of his catechetical letters, and he talked about how ultimately part of what's fundamental to being a person is freedom, and how the soul is self-governed. We decide what we are going to do with our lives. Although he says the devil can suggest, he has not the power to compel us against the will. And that's really important. So ultimately, it's important we're exercising our freedom and we're engaging in self-government over our own soul, but the devil has this sneaky ability to tempt and suggest things, even planting images in our own heads. And so why does this matter, I think, within the context of marriage? Well, the devil can't make us do something. And I think that that's important to understand. Our human freedom isn't to do whatever we want, but it's to do good. Now, if you're someone who's married and you think about this whole idea of freedom and will, well, what does freedom look like within marriage? What happens when there is temptation? Some people don't want to get married because they think that their freedoms are removed when they get married. But in actuality, marriage directs what is good in your life and what you're responsible for. And so it allows you the opportunity to do the right thing. In fact, St. Cyril of Jerusalem today being his feast day, he says, if you will, you accept it. If you will not, you reject it. So basically we could say, if you want something and if you are willing to make it happen, it'll happen. But if you're not willing to make it happen, you will reject it. Well, what do we often reject within marriage? Our spouse. The things we're supposed to do to keep the house running, to keep the marriage growing. This is part of the reason why we're going to be talking in just a little bit with Father Dave Heney about specifically the topic of gender roles within marriage, because this is so important to see some of the responsibilities we have as men and as women. And so this is so important that we see that it's important that we make things happen, that we're willing to grow within our marriages, that we're willing to make faith a priority, and we're willing to be spiritual leaders in our home in the proper context of what that means, given our specific roles. Now, it was fascinating to me. There's another comment by today's saint, St. Cyril of Jerusalem, that I thought was relevant to marriage and this whole idea of freedom. He said, "The sheep is gentle, but never was it crowned for its gentleness." Because we often refer to sheep as being these gentle, cute little animals. But he goes on to say, since its gentle quality belongs to it, not from choice, but by nature, this is where I think the turning point is. Because gentleness belongs to the sheep by nature, not by choice, there's nothing to be crowned for being gentle as a sheep. But for a human person, to will something is challenging. We have freedom. That's part of what makes us human. But to will something is to choose. It's not just something that happens as a habit per se. And so this is why marriage is so important. Heaven is attainable because of free choice. And that's what's so scary when we think about death, judgment, heaven, and hell. But it's also really scary when we think about marriage. Often we gain human respect from other people because of the things we have willed to do and make happen. You see, marriage is an incredible challenge, but it's an opportunity to overcome ourselves, deny ourselves, and ultimately choose the other person. I remember some years ago I focused in my work on the topic of marriage as redemptive suffering. And some people would push back and say, what are you saying, that marriage is awful? No, but I personally took up a tradition that is known in other parts of the world, apart from the United States, where you get married on a crucifix and you exchange your vows over what will be your family crucifix in the home. And I remember part of the tradition of the rite is that the priest says to the congregation, to the couple, my husband and I, he looks at us and says, "You have found your cross." And the cross is one another. And some people went, "Ooh, wow, that's really intense." But then he went on to explain that above turning quickly to a counselor, to divorce, to this and that we turn to God to help resolve our struggles. And that we turn to God to help transform our hearts. So marriage as redemptive suffering should be understood in this way. Not because it's miserable, even though it can be at times, but because we can pick up the cross of sacrificial love just like Christ did. And in dying to ourselves and choosing another person, boom, we just understood why marriage is a sacrament and a vocation. It's a path to sanctity that truly tries and challenges you in your marriage, but in your life as a whole to grow. Okay, I have to share with you a hilarious email to lighten the mood here, because we just talked about how, your marriage is your cross. So last week I was talking about how you should smile at your spouse when you see them. I'll never forget, some years ago, a friend of mine was talking about how there were some struggles in his marriage. And one thing really helped was, he said, when my wife smiled at me, it would ease tension. I would let go of some of the resentment and cynicism and even the growing apart that was occurring, because it would just lighten the mood even if there was frustration. So I said last week during our marriage hours, smile at your spouse when you see them for the first time, whether they just walked into the room, got home, and make eye contact. So Dolores wrote to me. She said, "We were married in 1984, but I want to keep things spicy, right? So I took your advice and I looked into my husband's eyes and I smiled. He asked me why I was looking at him like that. She said, I haven't laughed so hard since I don't know when. She said she went on to explain the advice, and he just started roaring with laughter as well. Clearly, this couple did not need this smiling advice. And I think that this was such a good sign of a healthy, happy marriage wherein he knows her so well, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing something so different and out of the norm? That they just start cracking up. I think that that's a really good sign of a healthy marriage. And it brings me back, the tip of smiling and making eye contact is so important. But maybe you do that naturally already and it's not something that's necessary. I don't know. Maybe consider it a science experiment for your marriage. See what happens when you start smiling. Does it help? Is it not necessary? Let me know. I loved this story. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. It's great to be with you. I want to jump into stepping into roles as men and women, specifically as men and husbands, becoming a spiritual leader. Father Dave Heney is here with me on Trending. You know him from the Family Rosary prior to COVID. He's a priest in Southern California in Los Angeles. And thank you so much for joining me today, Father.
Great to be with you, Timmerie. Glad to join you on such an important topic, too.
Yes, it's so important. Share with me your initial thoughts when you think about the role of men and husbands as spiritual leaders. Where do we find this dynamic, both in a dating situation, but also in marriages as well?
Actually, the idea of gender should be with us really our entire life. From childhood to teenage to young adult to marriage to old age. We come into this world as either male or female, and that means something. And I think the church is the champion of this idea, which is largely under attack, I know, in various areas. But, we believe that gender matters, both in marriage and in families, that they're not interchangeable, that it means something to be a man, it means something to be a woman. There's a wide variety of cultural expression of that, and there's a wide variety of ethnic and racial expression of that. But the basic idea of what it means to be a man and a woman has been around for millions of years, and has developed kind of behaviors that largely arrive from millions of years of evolution that really wrap around the idea of marriage and childbirth. So a lot of the characteristics that men genetically have and women genetically have really find their source not in ethnicity, not in race, not in culture, not certainly from government, but from this basic human behavior of getting married and having a family. And so we want to pay attention to that. And I think we're not asking for men to become more feminized. We're not asking for women to become more masculinized. We're asking each to rejoice in their own gender and their own understanding of it, their own respect of it, and that it is joined together in a common project. I loved how you started today, Timmerie, with this idea of laziness in marriage. Marriage doesn't happen by accident. Happiness doesn't happen by accident. It really involves our active engagement. So we want husbands and wives, men and women, to be actively involved in this common project. And what's the common project? A marriage is a common project. They're both working on it. And this common project of raising a family. Let me just say something else. I thought you started the program so beautifully with all these meditations of the cross and whatnot. But, on a wedding day, a couple on a Catholic wedding, they walk into a church, and they're going to see two things when they walk into the church. And they are the two biggest things that you're going to see in any Catholic church. And one is the crucifix, so you mentioned the cross, but the other is the altar. Mm-hmm. And it's no accident that the cross is right over the altar, because they both express the same dynamic. On the altar, Jesus says, "This is my body and this is my blood, given for your happiness." And that's what he was doing on Good Friday as well. So Holy Thursday and Good Friday really come together in those two largest items that you see in the church. And it's no accident that the wedding vows almost perfectly parallel the words of consecration. I give myself to you and only to you forever. I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. those are almost exactly the same as the words of consecration, in which a person is taking their entire self and wishing it for the good of another. So we have these two people, a man and a woman. They both are making this exact same vow. They're not different from each other. They say the exact same words, and they are joining together my maleness, my femaleness, and I'm offering it for the good of my spouse and for this common project of a family. So God wants us to be separate in that way. He wants us to be male and female, but to make that promise to join together for the good of this common project of a marriage and a family.
And just briefly commenting on what you said, we'll come back to spiritual leadership. We're going to talk later on in the show about why get married in the Catholic Church. Well, what you just said is so important because you add the abundance of graces on top of the model of Christ on the cross and sacrificial love. You have a sacrament and a path to holiness that implies and provides so many opportunities for sanctification in marriage and for a good marriage that lasts, that has glue that binds it together. Now, when we talk about glue binding a marriage together, let's talk about the challenge in our culture today of often men being afraid or uncomfortable, or might I even say lacking confidence in becoming the spiritual leader in their home.
Well, I think it's been a trend, in our country, maybe in the Western world for decades. This kind of a feminization of male spirituality. There's, I think some men feel like they can't express themselves. They can't express their male psyche very well because they're going to be, labeled as a male chauvinist or things like that. And so, unfortunately, we have, numbers of men who are somewhat frightened or feel somewhat intimidated or certainly confused about really how to express themselves. And I think it's important that we're not really talking about gender stereotypes, the man cave playing football, throwing their weight around, things like that. It really is, and again, I think the true male and female characteristics are not cultural, racial, or ethnic, but really derive from this really primordial behavior that, in all fairness, has been around for millions of years. This is not something that came from a recent culture, even races or ethnicity, or certainly any government. This is based in in how human beings basically arrive on planet Earth. Human beings do not drop from trees; they don't drop from the sky. They don't
come from the stork.
They don't come from the stork. They arrive because of a male and a female joining their two genetic material together in a very unique way. And there's only two. There is only, a male sperm and a female egg. That's it. There's no other combination that happens. So one type of human person has this gamete, one type of human person has the other. There's no new generation unless these two people come together. And then, remarkably, human children are born remarkably helpless. If you watch a horse being born, within a few minutes they're up and running around. Most of the animal world, new animals are kind of up and about very quickly. But in the human world, humans are born incredibly helpless, and they stay helpless in some families until they're 30 years old. No, just kidding. So a long time. And so they will die unless the mother and the father care for them. And so they care for them by bringing several powerful psychological features that are important for health. A woman's entire body basically is designed for childbirth. They have a sense of nurturing. They have a sense of caring. They have a sense of stability, of staying in one place. Kind of the nest. And then men have this sense of courage, of protection. There's always a sense of competence, of developing skills, and again, a sense of confidence. We have very brief mentions of this in the Holy Family. And just a little, we don't have a huge history of the Holy Family, but it is interesting that there's a little snippets there that kind of fall into these kind of classic behaviors that care for marriage and a family. You know, Joseph protected Mary from shame. She, you know, by being seen to be having a child outside of wedlock, the penalty for that could have been death. Mm-hmm. And so Joseph is protective of Mary in that sense by his sense of honor and his stature in the community as an older man. He protects the family by taking them to Egypt, and then from Egypt back to, not to Bethlehem, but to Nazareth.
Yes.
So he kind of conveys this sense of boldness, of taking a risk. And also I could say that, you know, men like competition. He outcompetes Herod. He outwits Herod. He kind of outfoxes him.
I've never heard that. Yeah.
And you know, I think people reading the story at that time would have recognized that here was Joseph kind of showing these classic male features for the purpose of caring for his marriage and a family, not for being strong and bold and being, you know, the head, but for the everything is used for the purpose of continuing the marriage and childbirth.
So how do men really show the spiritual leadership within their home? What's like the top 1 or 2 things you'd recommend they do?
Well, I think nothing succeeds like behavior. You know, you started talking about sheep. And I have to tell you that I grew up here in Southern California in the town of Thousand Oaks in Ventura County, which in the early 1960s, there were more sheep in that area than people. It was a sheep grazing community, kind of rural. And one time after school, I was out in the hills like I used to do, and I came over the hill, and there was this massive flock of sheep. And there was the leader in the middle, the shepherd, clearly the guy in charge. And I'm watching all these sheep. They're all munching on grass, having their sheep lunch. And then all of a sudden, the shepherd stood up. And the second he stood up, all of the sheep stopped eating. And they looked at the shepherd. And then the shepherd started walking. And all the sheep automatically followed. They weren't driven by dogs. They followed a shepherd who always led them to good grass and good water.
That's Father Dave Heney here on Trending. We'll be right back to discuss more on marriage roles, becoming a spiritual leader, and why gender matters. I have a special program planned for you to go with the fact that you don't have to wait to eat meat till Saturday. You can have meat because it's a solemnity right smack in the middle of Lent. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. We're going to discuss with Father Tim Grumbach how St. Joseph would have taught Jesus to pray. We'll also talk about the 7 joys and sorrows of St. Joseph and so much more. Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/forester.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
I'm back with Father Dave Heney here on Trending. You know him from the Diocese of Los Angeles, Thousand Oak. He also, prior to COVID, hosted with our own Karen Moran the Family Rosary Across America. And he's well known for taking trips to the Holy Land. So stay tuned. You might be able to take a trip with him again soon. You can find him at davehaney.com. We'll post the links on social media. Father, I want to just touch on those 2 tips for husbands starting to take on that spiritual leadership role. You shared an incredible story about the shepherd, but you mentioned to me prior to the show about how important it is for men to be inspirational and influential in what they do. Can you speak briefly to these 2 ideas?
Yes. Well, and again, you know, the shepherd, all those sheep followed the shepherd because the shepherd had a history of always finding good grass and good water. And so he was influential. He wasn't driving the sheep. So when we talk about spiritual leadership in the family, it's not coercion, it's not insistence, it's not yelling. It's credibility, it's integrity. It's living in such a way that people want to follow you.
There's trust there. There's
trust there, and there's also a history of credibility. So that trust is powerful. Now, I think, so where to get that? So you need practical ideas. And I think one of the very best ways to learn how to behave is to watch someone who does it well. That's how you learn baseball. If I'm talking to men out there, that's how you learn golf. That's how you learn baseball. That's how you learn football. You watch someone who's really good at it. And I think the church offers people who are really good at it in the lives of the saints. But I want to talk about a particular type of saint. So I think the best saint to talk about here are missionaries, people who have gone to another culture and are dealing with people different from themselves. So they don't arrive with maybe even knowing the language, but they spend a tremendous amount of time learning the other person. And they also have a sense of bringing something that's really good for them. So, you're a male, you are married to a different person, a female. So you want to learn as much as you can about this person, and then you have the sense that you have something good for her. Just like the words of the consecration,
Making
I have
yourself
something
credible.
for your happiness.
Yeah.
So I think if you look at the lives of the saints, especially those who are missionaries, you will find really, really very practical and very beautiful examples of people who are, taking the goodness of what they have, but learning how to adapt it well and how to present it well to someone who is different from themselves.
Yes. And this is so profound because Karen was just saying here, the two things that are missing, trust and credibility today. Women do not trust their husbands for many reasons that we could unpack that are legitimate, but sometimes they fueled as well. And the credibility factor. And so that poses, I think, a heavy burden on men who have not stepped into the role of showing that they are trustworthy or credible and reliable today.
I think men haven't, you started with this really remarkable word, laziness in marriage. And there can be laziness in husbands. Not so much, taking the nap on the couch, which is always a good idea, I think. No, just kidding. But the laziness of not learning their role, of not making a study of it. Like I said, marriage doesn't happen automatically. It happens when we study it, we learn from it, and we take the time to look at it and to focus on it. It just doesn't happen automatically. So sometimes you'll have a husband who's lazy, who's not learning, who's just kind of stumbling day by day, and he makes mistakes, and he gets yelled at, and then he gets resentful. And, the marriage kind of goes downhill from there. But again, if you took the time to say, look, I have started a beautiful project here. I have started a beautiful program called a marriage. And I want to pay attention to it. I want to be attending to it. I want to, make it grow. So you're going to do everything you can to do that. And that is the opposite of laziness. That kind of marriage will work. And so, our Lord said, I want that kind of relationship with all of you. I know you're busy all week, but at least on Sunday we will get together and we will make our marriage grow on Sunday. So I tell married couples the same thing. Never let more than 7 days go by where you don't focus on your relationship. Not the bills, not the house, not the neighborhood, but just you as a couple. Make it a point of focus. And if you do that, you'll begin to respect each other as male and female. But you'll also have a sense that the other person cares about how things are going and how this marriage is continuing. And then that to me, we're basically doing the same thing that our Lord asks of us, to meet with him at least once a week, to renew our relationship. Couples should do the same thing. And if they do that, they will have renewed respect for each other as male and female. And they will have a sense that they are working together as a team to make this beautiful project of a marriage and a family successful.
That's Father Dave Heney here on Trending with Timmerie, giving support, that backup for marriages that need the tune-up All of us need to tune up in our marriage, whether you've been married 6 months or whether you've been married 50 years. It doesn't matter. We can use this in a very profound way that can really transform and grow us no matter what state in our marriage we're in, no matter how holy or unholy or how much of a sinner we all are. Father Dave, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about gender roles in marriage and why they matter for both marriages and families.
I certainly think they matter because that's the way, first of all, male and female, he created them. That's the Genesis story. So, God decided that, children wouldn't drop off of trees or from storks. They would come from this male and female. So that's important. It's worth taking seriously. And they're clearly not interchangeable, that they are different, and therefore they should be valued and not diminished and not certainly equalized, that they really should be respected in their differences. Now, men and women will look at things differently. If someone has a problem, if a neighbor comes to your house and starts talking about a problem, the husband probably will want to fix it right away, and the wife will simply want to listen and deepen the relationship. Okay, that's fine. They're neither good nor bad. They're just different from each other. You don't want to think of one as superior than the other. They're simply different. Now, the
one wants to fix the system, and the other wants to engage the person.
Correct.
And I think that's so profound.
But the beautiful thing is a child watching this happen. That's where it really counts. The child is watching two different ways to respond to the neighbor. The child needs both. And the child can then grow up learning that sometimes you do one and sometimes you do the other and can make the choice. And they can only make that skillful choice later on because they've seen it happen by their parents when they were young. It's the greatest gift that you can give your children, to show kind of classical male features and classical female features so that your children see both, and then they can kind of integrate them in a very healthy way in their own psyche. We don't want masculinized women or feminized men. We want men to be men and women to be women, to kind of express themselves, kind of naturally, freely, without shame, without embarrassment, and without antagonism, and with great respect. And then children see both of these things happening, and they can integrate them in a healthy way in their psyche. So I think that's what the Holy Family did, and that's our model as well.
Father, we have a caller, Matt, in Madison, Wisconsin. He's in his 40s, and he's commenting about how a lot of young men today view traditional households. Matt, welcome to Trending. What comments and questions do you have for Father Dave?
Hey, Father. This is just an observation, but I see a lot of younger males not interested in the role of husband because traditionally that came with some type of leadership or authority within the family. So as a good example, and this occurs throughout society, not just within the family, someone in a hierarchical family has to make a final decision when two people disagree. So who is that? Traditionally, that would be the husband. So, and I'm not saying it's a power trip, but you can have two legitimately different viewpoints. But what happens so often, and I've seen this personally, is the wife will not back the decision of her husband. So if the husband has a different idea on how X should be handled, and both viewpoints are valid, then if the husband isn't given deference in saying that I'm going to trust that you're going to do what's right for the family, after 2, 5, 20, 100 of those occurrences, most men just say, I'm done, just do what you want. And we see this, I see this in the church too. At different parishes, you will have mostly female leadership from, liturgy type things or lectors, and men will step back. The more and more women take over roles, men will step back and move away from that.
They let them do it.
Personally, for me, I have a large attraction to the traditional Mass, largely because those roles are filled by males, and the view of those males are as strong leadership positions. So that's attractive to me because I see that's how Christ represented himself when he was on earth. He chose all males, not to be dominant rulers, but to be guides and leaders, and that's attractive to males. And
Yeah, Matt, this was really, really great insight, and I think this is so important. And Karen made the joke, is this person's name Karen, if you know the social media comment? When women don't tend to tend to override. I think we're on this override mode in our culture today, Father Dave, where men either don't want to step into the leadership and responsibility, as Matt said, to begin with, or when they do, it's overridden by the women in their lives. And so, I think the question is, how do we regain the balance when people are saying it's a no for me because it's either disrespected or I don't want the responsibility?
So that's a great question. And I think I just want to return to this idea of what is it that this couple is talking about? If all of their conversations are talking about house management or careers and jobs and bills and the kind of economic management of a household, then it's going to come down to a power trip. And it's going to come down to someone saying, well, darn it, I'm in charge, and this is what we're going to do.
Wow, that's profound.
Now, I think if a couple instead parallels what God asks us to do on Sunday, which is not to talk about those things, but to talk about our relationship with our Lord at Mass and to receive Him. If once a week a couple was to spend an hour talking only about their relationship, about themselves as persons,
or doing fun things together.
Well, not even that. That's separate. Okay. That's like a movie or dinner and everything. No, this is where their time together is. It's only about how are we doing as a couple? How is our marriage going?
Yeah, as a person, where are you at?
Right. And then if they did that once a week for half an hour even, then I think all the other issues of practical issues of where a decision needs to be made it will never be in a power trip. It will never be in terms of, me over you or you over me. It will be done out of that love that they have for what is the best for a family. So, making decisions that are the best for the family doesn't happen automatically. Mm-hmm. It happens only by practice, where on a weekly basis, God willing, on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis at least, never more than 7 days, because, God says you can forget about me all week, but as long as we have Sunday in which we talk about a relationship, that's okay. So there has to be that very frequent, at least weekly time when a couple is focused only on just the two of them and their love for each other. Where are they with that?
Yes. And
if that
Father
is
Dave,
strong, then everything else will work out.
And this is, I think, really it's standing out to me because I think about how with my husband, one thing that I've loved since we've been married is when we go out to dinner, it tends to be removing us from our regular day-to-day, things that all of a sudden when we're sitting there, we're eating out, we have that moment where one of us starts talking about where we're at in our marriage and it just happens organically. And I love it. Perfect. So maybe creating that environment or knowing those times when you do have that opportunity. That's Father Dave Heney. We'll post links to his website. Who knows? Maybe you can go on a Holy Land trip soon.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. We're going to talk about why get married in the church and what happened. We'll see if we have time when your spouse didn't want to have children. But Teresa from Chicago is calling and she has a comment about broken marriages today. Go ahead and share with us, Teresa. Welcome to Trending.
Thank you so much. The problem is so many men are going into marriages, and I'm speaking just men now, into marriages not having had the example of a father showing them how to be a husband. Maybe They come from, all right, so there you have that, and then they marry without an example, and they marry a woman who, like most today, is working, and that brings authority to her. So how do you help a man going into a marriage who's had no example?
This is a great question, Teresa. How do you help a man going into marriage with no example of spiritual leadership within the home, how to lead the home, take on responsibility? I think a lot of young men today crave to do this and they don't know how. Or they crave to have a deeper sense of respect and they don't realize that the lack of respect is due to their lack of initiative in taking on responsibility and taking on that example of inspiring others. Not by being the person that is head of the soccer team, that's the CEO of a company, but just the way you engage and hold your own life. And so I think that the way to find those examples is to identify people in your life who live this out. And if you do not have people in your life who lives this out, then find them. Ask for them. And maybe you start by finding the person who is a public figure, who's saying it how it should be, and they have a public profile. And what'll happen is that will begin to help you change your dynamic in terms of the people, in terms of friendships and models and mentors. Don't be afraid to ask someone to be your mentor. Someone who has a tremendous amount of leadership within their home, who takes on responsibility, is going to be someone who's going to be willing to bring you under their wing. And I think that that is so important, to have the humility to ask, but also to have the desire to grow, that you're willing to do something to make a change. And so I think that's a great comment, Teresa. Thank you for sharing. I want to transition now into the topic of why get married in the Catholic Church. And oh boy, we have so many questions. I wish I asked this question sooner and you called me letting me know your thoughts, and maybe we'll throw it out there next week. Maybe even just pondering, what about your vows do you remember from your wedding day? Do you remember them at all? And I think that this touches on why to get married in the Catholic Church. Someone asked me this recently. We could go on and on about theology and so forth, but I really think there are two primary reasons for marrying within the church. Number one, marriage is hard. If you've not been listening to today's show, we made that abundantly clear. Marriage is difficult. So why not have the intercessory graces from God that are bestowed upon you in a Catholic covenantal marriage? Why deny yourself those graces? This is why so many people, after having been married outside of the church, come back and have their marriages blessed. They want those supernatural graces bestowed upon their marriage. Why? Because there's an exchange of spouses, an exchange of persons that occur in a covenantal marriage. It's an actual sacrament, which is a path of holiness, but a way in order to receive grace. And these actually matter when it comes to marriage. Because marriage can be so challenging that we need God's divine intervention in order to make it through this path He has for us to potentially become holy and be with Him in heaven. The second big reason to get married in the Catholic Church is because the vows that are made within the context of the rite of marriage are a true guide for marriage. And sure, you could take the exact vows verbatim and say them in a courthouse, on a beach, on an island, whatever the heck you want to do that you think's better than getting married in the Catholic Church. However, Catholicism informs the marriage, and it expects these vows to actually be lived out. So when you write your own vows or you say whatever vows you think are cute, fancy, lovey-dovey, whatever it is, well, what can potentially happen is you don't understand that Catholicism, again, informs and expects these to be lived out. So how about appealing to an authority outside of yourselves to be the glue that keeps your marriage together, both in terms of the graces bestowed, as I mentioned first, and now in terms of the vows that are meant to be upheld, that are taught about in the tradition. Well, what are some of the fundamental dimensions of the vows that are made? That you come freely giving yourself. It is your choice. And if you acknowledge that this is your choice, then you're reminded that it is meant to be your choice because you made a vow to it till death do us part. Second, it's meant to be that you are totally giving yourself to the other person. You're a total gift to that person. You don't have another person on the side. You don't kind of think, well, you're my spouse when I'm at home, but when I'm at work, I live a different life. No, your work is for the purpose of your home and your family. We work to live. That is, we use our work so that we can live our life. We do not live to work. And I think that's really, really important. Work is to help us in life, not to be our life. Third, we're called to be faithful to our spouse, and that means a sense of permanence in marriage. Fidelity, both in terms of intimacy within marriage, no extramarital affairs, remember the whole Ashley Madison hack? Let's not repeat that. No looking at pornography or all the other things. Remain faithful, emotionally faithful. We don't speak enough about emotional affairs that occur. And allow that to help create that deeper understanding that marriage is permanent till death do us part. And number 4, marriage is meant to be fruitful. It's meant to go beyond yourself. It's meant to grow who you are, what you do. It's meant to bear fruit of children. And that is so important. And you see, when we understand these 4 dimensions as part of the marriage vow within the Catholic rite of being free, total, faithful, and fruitful, it informs how we live our lives, and it creates a level of expectation that helps push forward the marriage. And this is so important in a time where many people aren't entering into marriage freely because they think, well, this is what I got to do. I've got to get married, right? And so they commit to someone they're not really that interested in. Or maybe because they're engaging in intimacy too soon, they've suddenly gotten someone pregnant and they feel like they should. Because we don't honor the body today, and we don't honor the fact that children come with the romantic love of a husband and a wife. Well, we also have this attitude of infidelity in our relationships, which violates this idea of being faithful and totally giving ourselves to someone. What person in this culture wants someone to be forced to marry them, to have extra affairs, and to say that this love is going to expire, or to say that this love shouldn't bear fruit? We don't want any of those things. And so to have this idea of things being free, total, faithful, and fruitful, those vows within marriage, it transforms what we do. And so this is, I would say, the vows and the grace of the sacrament are the 2 most predominant reasons for marrying within the church. And Christ is our ultimate guide. He shows us what to do. He shows us how to live these vows. He grants us these graces. And so if you know someone who's considering getting married outside of the Catholic Church, maybe they really want to get married on a beach. I'll never forget one of my theology professors in school said, "You want to get married on a beach and not get married in the Catholic Church? Go for it." I'll never forget, one day I was walking along the coastline and I'm looking and, there's the beautiful landscape, but it's cloudy. Bet they didn't plan for that. Then I'm looking and right next to them is just this washed up bunch of junk from the ocean. And here's their beautiful wedding, and it smells, and there are flies. I think there was a dead sea creature. And he's like, real romantic. You'd rather this than a beautiful Catholic church? You'd rather this than the beauty of the vows given, the exchange of persons in covenantal love with God as the glue that holds the marriage together? Sure. And so we have to help people understand what Catholic marriage is. We have to help them understand it is the glue that holds 2 persons in a committed lifelong relationship of marriage together. That you give yourself freely, totally. You vow to be faithful. And your love equates to something fruitful and growth between the 2 of you. These are reasons to get married in the church. And I hope that you live these out if you're married, and that these are the reasons why you too wish to be married. Join me tomorrow for a special episode focusing just on St. Joseph. It's incredible. You don't want to miss it. And tonight, I'll be jumping on a little later on Instagram for an Instagram Live to talk about relationships and growing. Tomorrow about St. Joseph. I have a special program planned for you to go with the fact that you don't have to wait to eat meat till Saturday. You can have meat because it's a solemnity right smack in the middle of Lent. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. We're going to discuss with Father Tim Grumbach how St. Joseph would have taught Jesus to pray. We'll also talk about the 7 joys and sorrows of St. Joseph and so much more. Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.